the next talk. So please welcome Daniel. I just found out that his hobby is drawing and lockpicking. That is still legal. I just checked. So please warm welcome for Daniel.
Hello everyone. I'm a penetration tester for my taxi, and today I'm gonna show you how the techniques I use to find some security bugs in our APIs. So like I said, I'm a penetration tester for my taxi. I've been working here for a bit more than a year, and I've got 3 years experience in IT security. I'm also a command line freak, so if I can do some task in the command line, I'll probably do this. I'll try my best, or even better in Emacs. And yeah, if you want to contact me, you can reach me at this email address. And here's the agenda for today. So at my taxi, since we have a huge code base, there is it's kind of difficult to find a starting point for the attacks, and the best way I found to deal with this issue is to act like an external attacker who doesn't know how our systems work, and can see just the traffic between the device, the mobile device, and our servers. And the easiest way to do this is by performing a man-in-the-middle attack on the device, installing a new certificate, sniff this traffic, and with the knowledge acquired from with a basic understanding of how the functionality works, I can write a script which will automate the basic tasks, and afterwards I can fuzz the parameters to check for different unusual responses from the server. And using those findings, I can create attack scenarios by extending my script and present them to the developers who are responsible for that. So the first step would be to route to the Android or iOS device, because people book taxis from mobile devices, and since both of those operating system are quite restricted, I need to get a root or jailbreak access to the device, so I can access inaccessible data from the normal users. And also sometimes this step is necessary to install a new certificate authority on the device. I won't go into much details about how to do this. You can find this all online. And the next step would be to intercept the connection between the application and our servers, but to do this, the application needs to trust the certificate that I'll be injecting, and that's why the SSL. That's why I needed to install the certificate in the first place, and I redirect the traffic from the user to my own device, and from my device I create another connection to the to our backend, and therefore I can see all the connections that go through. And to do that, I use a web proxy. There are many available. I used burpsuit, proxy, and Meet proxy, and I prefer the last one because it can be easily automated with Python, and Python is my favorite language. I don't know what I'm doing here at this conference. And it's also because it's a command line, and it's I don't really like using the mouse for such tasks. So after I sniffed the connection, I filter out the unnecessary requests which play no role in my attacks. I try to replicate all those requests with my script, and important is to make the code flexible so I can use it to test it in different development environments or different user accounts, so to see if the bug is reproducible in other environments as well. And I try to automate as much as possible with my scripts, so later it's easier to show them to other people. So, and now after this is done, I start fuzzing the requests. I run the script that I wrote, send the request through the web proxy. Then I look up interesting parameters which can be exploited. Afterwards, I find security payloads. I'll show you in the next step how I do that. And then I fuzz and check for unusual responses that can be used to trigger different, to make the application behave in unexpected ways. Here's some of the list of the payloads that I found useful. The first one is called Big List of Notice Strings, and it contains basically a list of 600, 700 different inputs that can cause applications to behave unexpectedly. The second and the third one, Fast Bin Payload of the Things, contain different attack vectors. For example, if you want to test the XSS, SQL injections, and so on, you can find them here. And the last one, SecList, is a combination of attack vectors like the first ones, but it also contains username password combinations, linked databases, and so on. So I encourage you to take a look at those projects and get familiar with it. And the next step would be to create attacking scenarios. So if I already found some bugs, then I try to check if it's reproducible in another environment, in a pre-live, live, and so on. I also extend my scripts to create those attacking flows, so that will be easier to show them to the developers. And after I inform them, wait for the fix and use the same script to check if it's fixed or not. And here I'll have a demo. It's basically, instead of using our own internal MyTaxi tools for the presentation, I'll use the OWASP Juice Shop project, which is a really nice project made by OWASP team, which is basically like a web application that is intentional vulnerable, so you can play around and try to find different security bugs inside. And yeah, this there'll be quite a lot of information in this demo, so if you have questions, you can just stop me and ask. So here's how it looks like. It has a scoreboard with the challenges. It's rated in by difficult levels, and also by categories. If you want to learn about XSS, for example, you can easily find here. It's pretty cool. I recommend you to check it. But for this demo, I'll show you just how to exploit the login function. So here I tried to log in with an admin user, but I don't know the password. So it says invalid email or password. And this whole traffic was sent to the web proxy here. That's Meetm proxy that I use. You can see the requests. And I here a bunch of JavaScript files, some pictures, which are not really interesting for my attack, and therefore I'll filter them out and delete them from the view. I select JavaScripts, images, CSS files. And then I delete them, and it will be a much nicer view of the whole traffic until now. It looks like this, and at the end you can see the post request, which with the response 401, so the user was not authenticated when I tried to log in. You can see how the request looks like. It says just a JSON with the email and password, and the response is 401. And here's the Python code that I wrote for this demo. Basically, just 3 different functions in Python, because that's all that's required to log in with the user. The first function gets the security questions. We need those to create a user account. And as you can notice, every request has a proxy and sends it through my web proxy, so I can fuzz it later. The second function creates a new user, and I put the parameters as optional, so you don't have to specify a email or password. If you don't, it will just generate a random one. So that's easier to test. You don't need every time to change the string for a new username. And the third function is the one which logs in the user. And the actual code that I wrote is made of 2 different parts. The first one creates a random user. It's assigned them to those variables and logs in the user. And the second part tries to register a new user account with the specified details and then log in. So that's basically what I do, but for the metaxi stuff. So now if I run the script, I will see 6 new requests. The first one gets the security questions, and it's also just a JSON with the data with those questions. The second request tries to register a new random user or random passwords and uses the first security questions that we got back. And the third responds with the 201 created and some details about the user. The login process sends just a JSON with email password like we saw before, and you get back an access token. So that means we are already authenticated as this user. Now next, once again, security questions. That's not important. And when you try to register a user with that we already created, then we'll get back 400 bad requests. So email must be unique. You can't create 2 users with the same email. But when I try to log in, it works fine, so I get an access token either way, because this user already existed. So the next step now would be to fuzz the parameters. And since Mint proxy doesn't contain by default any fuzzing functionality, I wrote my own Python add-on, which basically parses the request, extracts all the parameters. I'll show it in a while. Here, extracts the parameters that I can fuzz, so I can just choose one of those. It gets the data from the HTTP body, the headers, the cookies, and the URL. Here I know the vulnerability is inside the email field, but in the real world there is a lot of trial and error. You just have to go around and understand how this whole stuff works. So here on the bottom side you can see my add-on. So it's fuzzing the email field with the payload from big list of notice strings. And my script also accepts 2 different parameters. The first one is encoding, which could be base64, URL encoding, or none, in case I need to encode the string, but in this case the email is not encoded. I'll use none. And the second parameter tells me where should I put the payload. Before the value, in this example would be before penetration at test.de, after, or instead of. So we can just replace the whole value. I'll use replace in this case. So every time, for every string inside the big list of notice strings, it will use that string instead of the email field. Now it's running. And you can see a bunch of 401 responses, which means that it's not authenticated. The payload didn't do anything useful. So I'll filter them out, the 401 requests. And we can also see we have a bunch of 500. And this is more interesting because when we open the response, we can see an SQLite error. So that means it could be interesting if we try to fuzz this variable with the SQL injections payloads. And all the requests that generated this 500 error contains the single quote in the email field. So instead of using a real email, we used those values, and the single quote caused the SQL query to break and return an error. So now we already know what 500 responses are. We'll delete them and we'll try again the same stuff. But this time, instead of using the big list of notice strings, I'll use a list of generic SQL injections and see what happens. It's the same noun replace. So it's running again a bunch of 401 500, which I will delete. And except those two response codes, we also get 200 response codes, which is interesting. It looks like we already logged in without having the actual password. We can see there's actual token, a valid access token for the user admin, and this is what the email string looks like. So it just breaks the SQL query and returns true for everything. And I'll just copy this string, use it in the email field here. I didn't even bother to change the password. Just put random. And when I log in, it gets me logged in without knowing the user's password as an admin user. So that's all for the demo. And now, do you have any questions?
So, any questions?
So, in your work, determining all of these potential security vulnerabilities, are there one or maybe a couple specific types of vulnerabilities that keep popping up in people's applications and codes? And if so, what's the best way to defend against them?
I would say business logic errors, but that's really difficult to defend. Basically, you just have to hire penetration testers to do the job.
More questions?
Yeah, hi, thanks for the talk. I'm having a question regarding the first part of the talk when you mentioned that getting a man in the middle for instance, my taxi app, out of scope of this talk, but I wonder how hard it is because if you use any kind of technique like request signing or certificate pinning, it may be much harder.
Yes.
So do you use any?
For the moment, we don't use certificate pinning, but that's gonna change soon. And since it's our own certificate, we can just put our own inside and sniff it either way. But normally for other people's apps, if they use certificate pinning, you can't do this.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hey, Okay, thank you for your talk. It was quite interesting.
Mm.
I maybe missed the beginning, but I'm curious about running it automatically. I mean, before deployment or stuff like that, or it's only manual work that you do?
I
with-
automate it with my script, so it's running locally automated. So, for example, with the app, I wrote the script so I can automatically book and accept the ride, pay for it without opening the app.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
everything from the script.
I'm asking about making it part of the CI process, for example.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to find the business logic errors and stuff with automatic stuff, so someone should do this manually, because it's mostly just logic.
Is it a question here? Yep.
Thank you very much for your talk first.
Okay.
Question, since you are working on the field for several years, would you say that now that more frameworks like Rails or same for PHP and others are used which automatically escape parameters, for example,
Mhm.
these simple SQL injections are going down and it's
Yeah,
more...
totally. It's going down, but the problem still stays with the business logic errors. This can be done on the framework.
But that's a good direction at least.
Yeah.
Do we have more questions?
Thanks a lot, Daniel.
Welcome.